Dr. Kellen Vadhari never thought of humans as anything more than a primitive species. To her, they were barely intelligent creatures crawling through the cosmos, lucky to have survived this long. The Dominion, her people's vast and powerful empire, had conquered countless civilizations. They had seen advanced minds, creatures who could bend space and time, but humans? They were nothing. That belief shattered the moment she set foot on Earth. The war should have been easy. The Dominion's fleet was unmatched. Their weapons could melt cities, their soldiers moved faster than the eye could follow. No species had ever stood against them for long. When the High Council decided that Earth was in their way, they sent the fleet. It was supposed to be a swift conquest. It wasn't. The first few battles were predictable, humans fought, they lost, they retreated. But then something strange happened. They didn't break. The Dominion had expected panic, surrender. Instead, humans adapted. Their forces changed tactics overnight, learning from every loss. They used weapons no one had ever seen, moved in ways that confused Dominion commanders. Even their biology was strange. Injured soldiers returned to battle faster than they should have, their wounds healing at unnatural rates. Kellen, a leading xenobiologist, had come to Earth to study its creatures. Now, she had a new task, to study humans. The Dominion needed answers. Why weren't humans breaking like every other species? How did they keep pushing back? And why, despite their primitive technology, were they suddenly winning battles they had no right to win? Kellen stood inside a ruined human city, surrounded by the wreckage of war. Fires burned in the distance, smoke rising into the evening sky. She pulled out her scanner, waving it over a fallen human soldier. The body was covered in wounds, and yet, something inside him still pulsed with energy. She narrowed her eyes. Something wasn't right about these creatures. Something the Dominion had never seen before. A distant explosion shook the ground. Kellen looked up. Across the ruined street, a group of Dominion soldiers ran toward her. Their armor was scratched, their weapons low on charge. One of them, Commander Zovek, grabbed her arm. "We need to move. Now," he barked. "What happened?" Kellen asked. Zovek's face was grim. "They weren't supposed to attack tonight. We underestimated them again." Kellen frowned. The humans had been on the defensive for days. Why would they suddenly strike now? Then she noticed something, the bodies of fallen Dominion soldiers nearby. Many had been shot, others crushed under debris. But one of them had no wounds at all. Kellen knelt beside the body, her scanner whirring. The readings made no sense. The soldier's vitals had shut down just moments ago, but there was something else, a strange foreign signature, lingering in his cells. She had never seen anything like it. For the first time in her life, Dr. Kellen Vadhari felt something strange. Not curiosity. Not superiority. Fear. The humans were evolving. Fast. And the Dominion was running out of time to understand why. The discovery. Dr. Kellen Vadhari ran through the ruins, her breath sharp in the cold night air. The sounds of battle rumbled behind her, human forces were pushing forward again, forcing the Dominion to retreat. It didn't make sense. This was not how wars were supposed to go. The Dominion had fought countless species, had conquered entire civilizations with ease. And yet, these humans, these so-called primitives, were defying every expectation. Kellen clutched her data pad tighter, her mind racing through the results she had just gathered from the battlefield. The fallen Dominion soldier had died from nothing. No wounds, no internal damage, just, shut down. But something had been inside his cells. Something she couldn't explain. Something human. Commander Zovek ran beside her, his expression grim. "We're losing ground. The humans keep adapting. Every time we change tactics, they respond faster." It's like fighting an enemy that learns as it fights. Kellen glanced at him. That's exactly what was happening. They reached the Dominion outpost, a hastily built base surrounded by energy barriers. Soldiers hurried inside, carrying the wounded, reloading weapons, preparing for the next assault. Kellen barely noticed. She rushed into her lab, slamming the door shut behind her. The holographic displays around the room flickered to life as she uploaded the data from her scanner. She needed answers. Now. The screen filled with complex biological readings, Dominion DNA alongside human samples she had collected from the battlefield. She had studied countless species before, analyzed their strengths and weaknesses. But never had she seen anything like this. Human cells. They should have been simple, primitive, even. But they weren't. Under stress, they changed. They didn't just heal. They grew stronger. Faster. More efficient. It was impossible. Evolution took thousands of years, yet human bodies were evolving in real time. She zoomed in on the microscopic structure of the cells. That strange foreign signature she had detected earlier, it wasn't an infection. It was a response. The fallen Dominion soldier had come into contact with human blood during the battle. And his body had rejected it. His cells had shut down the moment they tried to interact with human DNA. It was as if something inside humans was so fundamentally different, so powerful, that his body couldn't handle it. Kellen's breath caught in her throat. Humans weren't just adapting to the war. The war was making them stronger. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. She turned, heart racing, as Commander Zovek stepped inside. He looked tense. "Tell me you found something useful," he said. "We're running out of time." Kellen hesitated. She wanted to tell him, but even she didn't fully understand what she was looking at. "They're changing," she admitted. "Their bodies are responding to the war in ways we've never seen before." Zovek frowned. "What do you mean?" Kellen hesitated, then pulled up two side-by-side images, one of a normal human cell, and another of a cell taken from a soldier who had survived multiple battles. "Look," she pointed. "This is a normal human cell before exposure to extreme conditions." She tapped the second image. "And this is after." Zovek leaned in. His eyes widened. The second image was completely different. The human cell had reinforced itself, rewriting its own structure to become more resistant, more efficient. More alive. "This isn't just healing," Kellen whispered. "It's like their bodies are learning from damage. The more pressure they're under, the faster they evolve." Zovek straightened, his jaw tightening. "So what are you saying?" Kellen exhaled. "I'm saying we made a mistake." Zovek narrowed his eyes. Kellen turned to him, her expression grim. "We thought we were fighting a primitive species." Her hands clenched into fists. "But we might be looking at the future rulers of the galaxy. The rising storm." Kellen Vathari stared at the screen, her fingers trembling over the console. The data pulsed like a heartbeat, alive, evolving, relentless. She had seen miracles of science before. She had witnessed species that could withstand the vacuum of space, creatures that could regenerate entire limbs in minutes. But this was something else. Humans weren't just adapting to the war. They were weaponizing it. Every battle, every injury, every moment of survival, their bodies learned. Their cells didn't just heal, they rewrote themselves to become better, stronger, faster. Every time they should have broken, they rebuilt themselves into something even deadlier. It wasn't evolution over millennia. It was evolution in real time. A cold chill ran through her veins. She had to tell someone. No. That wasn't the right thought. She had to decide who to tell. Her loyalty belonged to the Dominion. To the empire that had raised her, trained her, given her purpose. But now, staring at the impossible, at the future of warfare itself, she hesitated. Would the High Council listen? Would they understand the danger? Would they even care? The door to her lab hissed open. Commander Zovek stormed inside, his face hard as steel. He tossed a blood-stained data pad onto her workstation. It's happening faster. His voice was tight. Too tight. Kellen swallowed and picked up the pad. The files inside showed Dominion soldiers, warriors enhanced with the best technology in the galaxy, falling to humans who should have been too weak, too fragile to stand against them. Except they weren't fragile anymore. One human, previously recorded as an average infantry soldier, had survived 3 direct plasma shots to the chest. Another had taken a Dominion blade through the abdomen, and kept fighting. And the worst part? They weren't just surviving. They were winning. They're pushing into our strongholds now, Zovek said, his voice low. Scouts say they're using weapons they didn't have a week ago. We change tactics, they counter us in hours. We improve our strategy, they're already 3 steps ahead. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. You found something, he said. It wasn't a question. Kellen's throat tightened. She wasn't sure what to say. The truth? The humans weren't just growing stronger. They weren't just adapting. They were evolving into something the Dominion couldn't control. And the war wasn't making them weaker. It was forging them into monsters. Doctor, Zovek pressed. What did you find? Kellen took a slow breath. What she said next would determine the fate of the entire war. The monster we created. Kellen's fingers hovered over the console. The words on the screen burned into her mind, an undeniable truth she could no longer ignore. Humans were changing. And the war was making them stronger. She had run every test, rechecked every data point. There was no mistake. Every time a human survived a battle, their bodies adapted, not just healing, but enhancing. Faster reflexes, heightened endurance, improved resistance to weapons that should have killed them instantly. This wasn't just evolution. This was something far more terrifying. A sharp alarm blared through the Dominion outpost, making her heart lurch. Kellen turned just as the lights flickered red. Emergency protocols. Commander Zovek's voice cut through the intercom. They've breached the perimeter. All units, fall back. Her stomach twisted. The humans were never supposed to reach the base. The Dominion had superior defenses, advanced technology, an empire's worth of knowledge behind them. And yet, they were losing. Kellen grabbed her research drive and sprinted toward the exit. Outside, chaos reigned. Dominion soldiers fought desperately against an enemy they could no longer predict. Plasma fire lit up the night, but the human forces moved differently now. Faster. Sharper. A Dominion soldier swung his blade at a human marine. The blow should have been fatal. But the human twisted at the last second, a movement too precise, too unnatural. His hands closed around the Dominion's arm, and with a single motion, he snapped the reinforced armor like paper. Kellen gasped. That shouldn't be possible. Another human sprinted through the battlefield, dodging Dominion fire with movements that seemed pre-planned, as if he already knew where the shots would land. It wasn't luck. It wasn't training. It was something more. They were learning. They weren't just fighting back. They were winning. A Dominion officer stumbled toward Kellen, gripping his side. His once golden armor was stained with dark blood. He reached for her, his eyes wide with terror. Doctor. What have we done? He choked. Before she could answer, something moved in the smoke. A human soldier stepped forward. His uniform was torn, his face covered in dirt and blood, but his eyes weren't the eyes of a man anymore. They were calculating. Cold. Predatory. Kellen's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the same species she had studied weeks ago. This wasn't the fragile, primitive life form the Dominion had laughed at. This was something new. Something the war had created. Something unstoppable. The human soldier tilted his head, as if studying her. For a brief moment, Kellen saw something in his expression. Pity. And then, he moved. The line that should never be crossed. Kellen Vathrie's lungs burned as she ran. The Dominion outpost was collapsing around her, flames licking the sky, sirens screaming in protest. But the only sound that truly mattered was the silence of the humans. They didn't roar in battle rage. They didn't chant victory cries. They moved like ghosts in the smoke, unervingly precise, eerily silent. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The soldier from before, the one who had looked at her with something almost like pity, was still following. Not running, not chasing. Just, moving, as if he already knew where she would go. It wasn't natural. It wasn't human. She ducked into the remnants of a lab, her fingers flying across the control panel to lock the doors. The reinforced steel hissed shut, sealing her inside. For the first time since the battle started, she could breathe. But breathing didn't stop her hands from shaking. Her research drive was still clutched in her grip, the hard data confirming everything she feared. This wasn't just adaptation. This was a transformation. Kellen replayed the battle footage on her holoscreen. At first, it looked like a normal fight. The Dominion had the advantage, until they didn't. The humans' movements became smoother. Almost predictive. The ones who survived multiple engagements weren't just more experienced, they were different. Faster. Stronger. More than human. She pulled up their genetic data again, searching for something, anything, that could explain it. And then she saw it. A section of human DNA that had been inactive in their earliest scans was now fully awake. It hadn't been there before. The war had triggered it. Something deep in their biology, something ancient, something their species had forgotten. Kellen's breath hitched. The Dominion had spent centuries as the rulers of the galaxy. Their empire had thrived because they knew how to predict civilizations, how to control them before they could become threats. But they had made a fatal mistake. They hadn't predicted humanity. A metallic clang echoed through the lab. Kellen's eyes snapped toward the door. The lock hadn't failed. It was still sealed. But something, someone, was on the other side. She took a slow step back. The screen behind her flickered, casting blue light over the room. Another clang. Then, a voice. Dr. Vathrie. Her blood turned to ice. The voice was human. But it wasn't. It was too calm. Too steady. No anger, no rage. Just, understanding. Like he already knew what she had discovered. Like he already knew what she was thinking. Kellen's fingers trembled as she reached for the intercom. What are you? Silence. Then, a whisper. Something new. The lights flickered. The air in the lab felt thinner. Kellen pressed herself against the console, her heart hammering against her ribs. They know. They weren't just evolving. They were aware of it. And worse, they had embraced it. Kellen swallowed hard. The war was no longer about survival. It was about what came next. And she wasn't sure the Dominion, or the galaxy, was ready for the answer. The final threshold. The door didn't break open. It dissolved. The reinforced steel that should have withstood plasma fire for hours melted away in seconds, turning into fine dust, as if time itself had forgotten it was supposed to exist. Kellen Vathrie had seen powerful weapons before. The Dominion had entire fleets capable of reducing planets to rubble. But this wasn't a weapon. This was something else. She barely had time to react before the figure stepped inside. The human soldier, no, not a soldier anymore, moved without hesitation, his steps impossibly smooth, his expression empty. He still bled, his uniform still torn from the battle outside, but his wounds, they didn't matter. His body had already rewritten itself. His eyes met hers, and for a single moment, Kellen felt like she wasn't looking at a living being anymore. She was looking at a force of nature. A whisper of something ancient, something forgotten. Something the Dominion had never accounted for. Dr. Vathari. The voice was human, but it wasn't. There was no hostility, no malice. Only certainty. Kellen forced herself to stand tall. What have you done? The human tilted his head. His gaze flicked toward her console, toward the research she had spent so long compiling. I think you already know. Kellen swallowed hard. She did. The war had never been about territory. It had never been about resources or power. It had been about unlocking something buried deep within the human race. Something no one, not even the humans themselves, had understood before the first shot was fired. She turned toward her holoscreen, scanning the data one last time. The inactive genetic sequences that had lain dormant for millennia were now fully awake. The war wasn't changing them. It was returning them to what they were always meant to be. Her breath caught. This wasn't an accident. The human didn't blink. No. Kellen's mind reeled. The Dominion thought they had been the invaders. But what if they were wrong? What if humanity had been waiting for something, someone, to trigger this change? What if this war had never been about conquest? What if it had been a test? She shook her head, stepping back. Your species, you weren't supposed to be this advanced. The human's expression didn't change. We weren't. He looked down at his own hand, flexing his fingers. As if he, too, was seeing himself for the first time. We were asleep, he said. The war woke us up. The realization hit Kellen like a blade through the chest. The Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries. They had crushed entire civilizations, rewritten history to shape the galaxy as they saw fit. But they had made a fatal mistake. They had thought humans were primitive. They had never asked why. The war was ending. Not because the Dominion had lost, but because humanity had outgrown it. The human took another step forward. He wasn't here to kill her. He didn't need to. He was here to give her a choice. Stay with the Dominion and watch them fall. Or stand with the future. Kellen's fingers curled into fists. For the first time in her life, she realized she wasn't looking at a war. She was looking at the dawn of something new. Something greater than the Dominion. Something greater than any empire. Something unstoppable. And for the first time in her life, she had no idea what came next. The end of one, the birth of another. The human did not move. He simply stood there, watching. Not like a predator cornering its prey. Not like a soldier demanding surrender. He stood with patience. As if he already knew what Kellen Vathari would choose. And that terrified her more than anything else. The Dominion had fought wars for centuries, their conquests precise, calculated, inevitable. They had ruled the stars because they understood the limits of life, the patterns of progress, the weaknesses in civilizations. But what they had never accounted for, what they had never even imagined, was a species that had no limit. A species that could rewrite itself. Kellen's fingers hovered over the console. One button. That was all it would take. One message to the High Council, one last desperate warning that the Dominion was not fighting a war anymore. They were witnessing an extinction event. Not of humanity. Of themselves. The human spoke, his voice quiet, steady. The Dominion cannot stop this. Kellen flinched. He wasn't threatening her. He wasn't even speaking with arrogance. He was stating a fact. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. You knew this would happen. His head tilted slightly, those unsettlingly calm eyes locking onto hers. Not at first. But now we do. Kellen's breath came faster. The war had not created this change, it had only accelerated it. The humans had not evolved because they wanted to. They had evolved because they were forced to. And now, they were something else entirely. Something no empire could ever hope to control. The Dominion would not win this war. They could burn 100 planets, deploy every weapon in their arsenal, it wouldn't matter. Because humans would only adapt. Survive. And then, eventually, replace them. Kellen felt something in her chest that she had never felt before. Not in all her years studying inferior species. Not in all her time believing the Dominion was the pinnacle of existence. Doubt. She looked at the human standing before her, still, patient, waiting. Waiting for her. Not to surrender. Not to fight. To choose. She clenched her jaw. She could send the warning. She could try to stop this. But deep down, she knew the truth. The Dominion's time was over. This war had never been about winning. It had been about who would inherit the future. And Kellen was looking at them. Slowly, she lifted her hand from the console. The message remained unsent. The human exhaled softly, as if acknowledging her choice. He turned toward the ruined battlefield, toward the fires that marked the end of an empire. You were right about one thing, Kellen whispered. He glanced back. She met his gaze, her voice steady. We thought humans were primitive. A pause. But we never asked what came before. For the first time, the human smiled. Not in victory. Not in arrogance. But in understanding. Then he was gone, disappearing into the night, where the future of the galaxy was already being rewritten. And Kellen? She stood alone in the wreckage of the past, knowing that history had just turned its final page. The Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries. But that reign had ended. Because something older had finally awakened. And it would never sleep again.